last time I saw darling Corrine, she was standing by my bed. Oh, baby, strapped on her backside. Pretty well gone tonight.
We're here today to talk with Mark Laxer, who runs a software company, a storytelling gathering that's been going on for more than 20 years, wildlife conservation group, and in 2004 invented virtual ecotourism, which is certainly appropriate for today's times. Mark has written previous books, including Take Me for a Ride and The Monkey Bible. And I'm Lew Toulmin. I'm sort of a traveler, and I've known Mark for over 20 years. And I'm privileged today to talk to him about his new book, which is called Rama Trauma Trump, which certainly is topical. And I've got a number of questions for Mark, but did I miss anything or leave out anything or say anything incorrect?
Yes, you did. You left out the most important bit, Lew, and that is, before we talk about my book, I just want to mention your book, the most, let me see if I remember properly, because I've read this book and it's just amazing. The most traveled man on earth.
Exactly. That's right. That's right. Yep.
And it's funny because I know you through, if I'm not mistaken, through the storytelling traveler circle, travel storytelling gathering that used to meet down in Washington, D.C. And when that book first came out, I thought it was an autobiographical account, because I know from hearing your many amazing stories, you're just a brilliant storyteller. I assumed that you were the most traveled man on earth, but I was wrong.
No, I don't claim to be. The book starts off talking about the two men who were competing for that honor back in the early 2000s. And then that goes on for a while and then segues into some of my adventures trying to catch up. But they were in the major leagues and I was maybe in the second or third rank behind them. Never did quite catch up with them. But that book is available on Amazon and eBay if anybody wants one. But we really want to talk about your book today because it's much more topical, and it's a very important book because of what's going on in the world today. So maybe you could summarize it a little bit for the people who are watching. Tell us a little bit about the book.
Thank you. So the first thing I should say about the book is it's nonfiction. It's based on my first book, my first book is not a graphic book. This third one, the one that we are now discussing, Rama Trauma Trump, I left the cult and now look what happened, is a graphic book, which is another way of saying it's like a comic book. It's a story of a young man who gets himself in and out of what gradually becomes a destructive cult. The young man, by the way, that's me. The young man leaves the cult, tries to reconcile and grapple with what happened to him and try to reconcile the past and try to understand how that happened. And in that process of trying to understand it, some years later, the young man looks around at society, at not cult, but culture, at our culture, and comes to recognize that there are cults all around us on various dimensions, and one of which is the cult of the President of the United States, the cult of Donald Trump. When I say cult, Lew, I'm not talking about a cult in a benign sense, like the cult of Gandhi or the cult of, equal rights. I'm talking about a destructive cult where abuse happens, where there's a disinformation bubble, where someone is gaslighting and deceiving others for their benefit, and where people's self-confidence and their sense of self-identity and self-direction is chipped away. So that's sort of a framework, a thumbnail of this third book of mine, Rama Trauma Trump.
And why a graphic novel? Why not some other medium?
Well, one reason is that we live in a post-literate society where people don't seem to read books much. If you have more than 140 or 280 characters, such as like a tweet, people tend to not read it. And I'm experimenting. I have a good friend up here in Vermont who is an artist, and she is an amazing artist. Her name is Marcy Vallette. And she and I and another dear friend who has a book coming out about cults, everyday cults, her name is Jarette Bouillon. And the three of us work together to educate people. We're not making money per se off it, but we're just educating people about cults. And that sort of evolved into Marcy and I collaborating on this third book where she does the illustrations to my story. So basically this third book is my first book, Take Me for a Ride, Coming of Age in a Destructive Cult, which is also free on the internet. Just Google it, it's up on Project Gutenberg. She took that and with my direction and help and her direction and help, crafted an amazing, I say amazing because Marcy's an amazing artist. I like to think I'm a storyteller. Good for me. Pat on the head. But Marcy's just amazing. And she was able to take my story and turn it into just the most remarkable, dark, humorous, compelling story. And you know, I'll leave my hat on, but you know, hats off to her. And that's how this book became a graphic story. It was just a collaboration of an artist and a writer, and we're hanging out trying to educate the public. The book is, I think, more of a PSA, more of a public service announcement, but it's also a compelling, sad story. It's an emotional journey.
It sounds like the audience is really not a particular segment, but really the entire American electorate and population. Is that fair, or is it targeted to a particular segment?
I'm not very good at marketing and PR, as evidenced by the fact that I can't seem to get CNN or New York Times or anybody to answer my calls. I'm not going to beat myself up over that, by the way, because I think for anyone who's not a celebrity, it's hard to get attention. But yeah, so marketing and PR is not my forte. I don't know what the segment is, what my true audience is. Marcy feels, and I think I agree with her, that it's kind of targeted toward younger people. It's sort of like a dark comic book, like Mad Magazine sort of kid who's 18 years old and is feeling very rebellious. I think it may work for them. I've also had friends of mine who are older, you know, rabbis and society leaders and people in their 60s and 70s and actually 80s. My writing mentor, Patsy Sims, who was a director of a graduate writing program, and she's written books that, you know, get written about in the New York Times. She says to me, this book should be, she loved it. She said, this should be in the national dialogue today. Not just because it's a free book, not just because you go to Rama Trauma Trump.com and download it for free and share it with your friends for free, but because it's a powerful educational piece that can teach people as it's to connect the dots, like what's happening out there in America. This book helps people understand that.
And is it sort of unique as a graphic novel? I mean, my impression of most graphic novels that I've seen in a bookstore are sort of adventure, sort of modern James Bond or something like that. But this is very political. It's autobiographical. It's sort of grabs you by the gut. So is it quite different, do you think, or are there other things like it?
I'm not sure if there are things exactly. I think there is a sense of, it's not so much James Bond shoot 'em up. There's kind of a gentle, speaking to power. So in that sense, it might be sort of, James Bond, I think of James Bond, it's flashy. I don't know how flashy this is, but it's definitely bold in the sense of a Marvel comic book would be, or James Bond. There's a boldness to it in that this book, like the first book, is speaking to power. It's trying to take some very steep hierarchical abusive relationship in my first book, in the case of this spiritual, quote unquote, new age leader to his flock. Now it's to Donald Trump, to his larger flock. It's speaking to that. My first book helped Rama come down a few notches in his power. We have yet to see if this third book takes Trump down a notch or two, or if it's just going to be read by a much smaller audience. But we'll see. I'm not sure, Lew, if there are books like it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think I remember you said at one point, I think on the back cover, that your previous book had taken down that other cult, or had involved a giant lawsuit, which I think you won. Maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, and perhaps this book will have the same sort of impact.
I got sued $30 million
Wow.
as a way to silence me, as a way to scare me, as a way to so I'm not James Bond, I'm not Iron Man or Ant-Man or any of these great story superheroes. I'm just this guy who cares about checks and balances, who cares about people, who does not want people to get hurt or abused. I guess when I got sued, this is many years ago, I was deposed for many hours, and the cult leader had painted me, as he painted all his inner circle people, as mentally ill. And out of it, it turns out I'm not that. And I kind of a bit ran circles around them. And I guess they tried to have me sign a settlement agreement where they're kind of taking my arm and twisting it behind my back, because their lawsuit wasn't gaining much traction. So they tried to get me to sign things that I will not do this, I will not do that. And here in America, using the legal system to abuse people, it just doesn't feel right to me. Whoever you are, whether you're the president of the United States or you're just some schmuck who is hurting people in a spiritual, quote unquote, realm, it just doesn't feel good to me. So I said to the attorneys and their side, I said, I'm not signing that. And actually Wired magazine was paying for all of my legal fees, which came out to be about $250,000, because they were co-defendants. And they said, Mark, we're helping you. Please sign the settlement agreement. I said, I can't do it. So it turned out that everyone signed the settlement agreement except me. And then I went on to take my first book and put it on the internet for free. So I was not silenced by this $30 million lawsuit. I was not intimidated by it. That's not true. I was way intimidated by it. But the bigger journey was that it did not intimidate me.
Right.
And I don't know what pushback will happen with this Rama Trauma Trump. I left the cult and now look what happened. It's my story. Marcy's the artist. Trump is a public figure. And I don't think I'm saying anything about him I'm just basically taking his words and sharing it with people and framing it to suggest that this man may not be a destructive cult leader, Donald Trump, but he sure as hell shares a lot of attributes, a lot of characteristics
Right.
with destructive cult leaders. Someone wants to sue me over that. That's their problem. It may backfire. I don't know. I don't know what there is to sue. It's
Right.
I have nothing against Donald Trump personally, other than he's hurting a lot of people. So it's not a vendetta. I'm just trying to help people not
Very
be
good.
hurt by an abusive personality.
Right. Well, the book seems to have so many parallels. As you say, it's sort of like if it looks like a duck and it quacks like a duck and it swims like a duck, it probably is a duck. I mean, you mentioned intimidation by lawsuit. That certainly goes on in this administration, forcing people to sign documents that they don't want to sign, that bind them for life and restrict their ability to speak. That sounds. I'm interested in, tell us more about this other aspect of this administration and your experience of sort of the inner and the outer. I mean, the abuse of people who are in the inner circle and then throwing them out and denigrating them enormously when they're out. I mean, was that, do you see parallels there with this administration in your experience?
I do. And I think when you look at some of the people who served Mr. Trump in the cabinet and his, if you will, his inner circle, I think that he has been abusive to them. I know that Stalin used to shoot his inner circle. He would kill them as a way to maintain his very steep hierarchy. Trump degrades people. He badmouths them. You have a very noble, courageous, upstanding person like Jim Mattis, General Mattis, who is a real, yeah, he's a real leader, and he has integrity. And Trump, you know, there's only so much someone like Mattis can handle. There's what you know in the inner circle and what you share with the public. Very much, I'm sure, for Anthony Scaramucci and all these inner Trump circle people, I'm sure that, and I'd be real curious to see what's happening inside Kellyanne Conway's brain. But there's what she knows and what she's sharing, and that discrepancy creates a kind of, in psychological terms, it's like a dissonance, cognitive dissonance. And that's very common in people who are in cults. I was in the inner circle of Rama, Dr. Frederick Lenz's cult, and I saw things, and there was a big discrepancy between what he was doing and what he was telling people. That created a big conflict inside my heart and inside my brain, which made it very difficult to leave. And it took years to sort that out. My first book, Take Me for a Ride, isn't my attempt to sort that out and share with people what I gleaned from that experience. I think with Trump, after he leaves office, which hopefully will be in our lifetime,
Right.
I think it will be very interesting as his charisma and as that conflict inside of his inner circle people wears off, as invariably it does. I'll be real curious to see what Kellyanne comes up with and what she does share, whether it's with her husband or with the country. Her husband being one of the founders of Project the Lincoln Project.
Right. Right.
But and some of the others, someone like Anthony Scaramucci, he's already sharing that he left the cult right away.
Right. Within 6 days.
He was, yeah, just like a handful of days, and he was gone. It was too much for him. Someone like General Kelly,
Right.
He's being very hush right now. And there's a sort of a calling to him by the public, like, could you speak to what you know about when Trump was going in Europe, and why what did Trump say in real life, not this fake news and all this nonsense. What did Trump say when there was an opportunity for him to visit the cemeteries of those who had fallen in war? What did Trump say? There is a factual reality. It's not just our imaginations. And that's what cult leaders like to think or teach or propagate, is there's like this blurry line between fiction and nonfiction. Bullshit. Bullshit.
Yeah, I think when he's recently, it's come out that Trump has been calling servicemen, including those who were killed in action, like Marines at Belleau Wood, which is sacred to the U.S. Marine Corps, losers and suckers for having participated in that. Did you see some of that kind of behavior in the cult that you were in, where outsiders were called names like that because they weren't in the cult or they weren't doing something that he wanted?
Yeah, I did, but it was slightly different language, Lew.
Okay.
Instead of losers and suckers, as Trump is purported to have said, and if he didn't say that directly, he sure has insinuated it with Gold Star folks and John McCain and so on. So there's definitely a pattern there. And I think even Fox News journalists are pointing that, yes, sorry, Trump has actually said things like that. Even Fox News does have something of a fact-checking department. Can you see it, Lew?
No, it's in the nanometer range.
And I wish them luck in coming back to reality. I hope that Fox can leave the cult and show a bit of integrity, and I will welcome them. I will not rail at them. It's sort of like someone leaves a cult. You don't do this. You say, welcome home. Welcome home. Welcome. You open your arms. But getting back to your point, sorry about that digression. I think that Rama used to say that the people on the outside were possessed by evil entities. They weren't necessarily losers and suckers, sort of like that, but they were infiltrated by these unseen ghosts, if you will. They were dark, and it was just a very dark, grim world that he depicted, unless you were with him and he could save you. It's sort of like what Trump does with the Mexicans. I can protect you from these marauding brown people. Of course, these marauding brown people are the ones who run they're doing the work of our country. They're hardworking. They have beautiful family values. I don't know if Trump knows anyone from Mexico. I do. Hey, Mr. Trump, let's go on a journey. I'll introduce you to some Hispanic people if you want to learn some values.
Right.
So Rama used to create definitely the outsiders, and he used fear as a tactic to create that wall.
Right. Well, let's look forward for a moment to, God forbid, second term of Trump, because it's interesting to me that the cult that you were in seemed to have started off not exactly benign, but not really evil, but it got worse, I gather, from the novel and your life experience that we've talked about over time. And it seems like to me that might well happen to the Trump cult / administration in a second term if that is allowed to go forward. And what are the dynamics? I mean, I'm thinking, the worst kind of case is the Jim Jones cult in Guyana back in the 70s, where everybody ends up committing suicide, including Jones. What do you see parallels, and what's the inner dynamic that makes this happen?
The inner dynamic is a psychological degradation. It's as simple as that. If you're a narcissistic sociopath, And I'm not saying that to call someone names. It's just you drop a brick and it falls on your foot, it'll hurt. That's just reality, baby. And if Trump is a narcissistic or maybe not, he's not a narcissistic sociopath. Maybe he has narcissistic sociopathic tendencies.
Okay.
Maybe that's more fair. I don't have a PhD in psychology. Sorry. But I would think from my own observations that he has some tendencies like that.
Right.
In my experience, people like that get worse over time, particularly if they are afforded power.
Right.
Because then it becomes a psychological loop where they start believing their own press.
Right.
And the us versus them and the paranoia and the fear that Trump is projecting on the outside, that's inside. Where's that coming from? It's coming from him. That's not going to get better. It's this feedback loop, and it's just going to get worse as society, the deep state, tries to check his power in a system of checks and balances. It turns out in a democracy, you're supposed to have checks and balances. It's not Democrat versus Republican. This is about rule of law. We're supposed to have checks and balances, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, whether you want to cut taxes or you don't want to cut taxes, or whether you want to have environmental regulations or you don't. Both sides should want to create a divide between fiction and nonfiction. Both sides should want to have checks and balances as depicted in the United States Constitution. The Trump people and Trump see, and this QAnon group, they seem to be very disconnected from what I would call the scientific Missouri, oh yeah, show me way of looking at the world.
Right, right. Yeah, that's an interesting question, because I've been looking into QAnon a little bit, and it seems like it's another cult, but my impression of most cults is that they fight with other cults and they call them the other, but this seems to be almost a merging of two separate ones, or maybe there already started to be an overlap. I'm not sure what the story is there, but in your experience and in your book, did your group ever encounter other groups and sort of merge or fight with them, or what happened?
Rama used to sort of put people in their place. He'd say, you know, Rajneesh has some occult powers, but they're not a fully enlightened being. And then Rama studied when I met him when I was 17 with another guru that Rama was a disciple of, and his name was Sri Chinmoy. Chinmoy was someone who had followers such as John McLaughlin and Carlos Santana, musicians. And Rama was very devoted to Chinmoy, it would seem, until Rama decided that he wanted to split and start his own group, at which time there was a kind of coup. My gosh, I learned so much about power when I was, at that point, 19 years old, and living in a house with Rama, with 3 women on the cliffs of La Jolla, San Diego, California, across the street from UC San Diego. And he said that Chinmoy had fallen. He'd fallen from grace, and he just so happened that he had risen and was attaining basement samadhi. I don't even know what basement samadhi is. It sounds humble, and then he declared that he was a last incarnation of a Hindu deity. So go figure.
Did he say that only he could solve it?
Yeah. and worse, he said that, I mean, he shared this with us, Lew, after or during a 14-day fast when we're all sleep deprived. And it was a very scary, disconcerting time for a 19-year-old who was sharing a house with him, because this is the tricky part. And my heart goes out to some of these Trump supporters. it sounds like my heart would not go out to Trump supporters,
Mhm.
but that is not the case. I think a lot of them have a kind of conflict within, where on the one hand, they could see, just like I saw with Rama, or not just like, but similar to what I saw with Rama, they could see that this guy is abusive, is being abusive of his station as president. He's pushing against laws and rule of law and all sorts of things. He's degrading our democracy, but they also, their network, their community are Trump supporters. And it's very hard, Lew, to leave a cult. A lot of the reason for that is, one is fear. It's also social context. Like, all my closest friends, just like a lot of Trump supporters, their closest friends, their family,
Right.
they're very entrenched in this pedagogy, this rhetoric, this propaganda, if you will, this story. It's a story. They bought into it, and it's so deep. It's very hard to pull back and say, you know what? This guy is really hurting people, because that's going to split up families if it hasn't already. That's what I went through in leaving a cult. Very hard to do.
Well, what happened to the cult that you were involved in, and what do you think will happen to the Trump cult, if we can call it that, if he gets a second term or if he's unelected? What happens to these folks if they don't pull a Jim Jones and just commit suicide or something, but they continue in life?
Right. Well, Rama, Dr. Frederick Lenz, committed suicide.
Wow.
And he wanted to take one person with him, but she decided last minute not to do that.
Jeez.
He had talked about taking all of us in an airplane into a mountain. He talked about that so many times over many years.
God. Wow.
Yeah. So in terms of Trump, gosh, Lew, I don't know. One reason why I'm sharing my story and giving it online for free is because I'm concerned. What happens if Trump is elected again? And I'm concerned, what happens if he's not elected? What if he loses? Either the electoral college, or whatever. If he loses in a landslide, or if it's a close race and he still loses, or if he wins by a huge margin, any way forward, I'm concerned. I don't know what can happen. I mean, he seems to be aligned with Russia and Mr. Putin. I'm concerned about that. I think Ronald Reagan would be very upset as to what happened to the Republican Party. Right. And not just because the Republican senators and Congress people have no balls, but to the American people. I think he'd be shocked the way that we're being played by Russia through disinformation and Mark Zuckerberg's nod, King Mark. And he is. I think he's the most powerful person on the planet. And I think he's complicit in the degradation of our society. More than Trump. Trump can't be helped. If anyone's to have pity, it's not from Mark Zuckerberg. He's a freaking smart guy, and he doesn't have the emotional incapacities that Donald does. I pity Donald. I do not pity Mark. Mark is culpable, in my humble opinion. From one Mark to another, clean it up, Mark.
Wow.
For the good of the country. Lew, I don't know how to answer your question. I am working 12 hours a day. I'm not making money from this. I'm mostly being ignored by, I am fully being ignored by traditional media, social media, partner organizations. I'm not saying this by way of whining or complaining. I'm just pointing it out that I'm doing this because I'm concerned. I'm not getting traction because I'm nobody. I'm not a celebrity. No one knows who I am. Mark Laxer, some guy in Vermont, blah, 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 blah. But I'm concerned about what paths are going to happen. And I feel that education is the best way forward to help people connect the dots and to read books like The Cult of Trump by Steve Hassan, which is the erudite version of my book, where, you know, Steve understands this stuff from a psychological point of view. I'm just a storyteller working with a brilliant artist.
Right. Well, just last point or two. First of all, we should mention that we're filming this on September 6th, so a couple of months before the election, in case this is watched afterwards. Obviously, we don't know what's going to happen, but we're trying to influence it. Second, going back to the evolution, you remember when Trump said early on in the pandemic that he thought that there was this school of thought that we should, quote, just let it rip and just let the pandemic rip through society and kill millions of people. And you could tell that then he would say, of course, we don't want to do that. But the way he said it, let's just let it rip. You could see that there was a psychological appeal to that. So that was 6 months ago. And now he's got an advisor in the White House who is basically saying that. And this is the guy now who is closest to him. Fauci is on the outs. And the latest advisor is sort of whispering in his ear, in effect, let it rip. We need herd immunity. Well, what that implies is that millions of people will die. And the reason I brought it up was what you said about the cult leader Rama talking numerous times about loading everybody into a plane and just flying into the side of a mountain. I mean, that seems to me where we're going. I think his cult is evolving. It's not staying static. And that's really, really scary. What am I off base? What do you think?
There are elements of the Trump cult that have the feel of a death cult. Largely, I think, because Trump is more interested in power than in empathizing. Or let's put it a different way. He has the ability and the drive to want power. He does not have the ability to empathize. Mm-hmm. So to kill off grandma and a bunch of other people, not just older folks, right, not just people who have obesity issues, but a broader swath of our population, I don't think, for me, I'm someone who empathizes. I visualize all these lives and love and richness and the fabric of existence and what it means to be human. It's our humanity. And I feel that so deeply. And so do all my friends. Mm-hmm. And so do people in my communities. And so do people all across the country. I bicycled across the United States as depicted in my first book, Take Me for a Ride. And I went across these red states. I went across Trump country. And these people are empathetic. These are good people.
Right.
They're not evil people out there in Nebraska and whatnot. They're good people. They really are. But Trump doesn't get that. He doesn't have that within him. So I think it's very easy for him to push Fauci aside and get someone. He's doing that with the heads of each of his institutions, each of the agencies.
Right.
Cycle through people until you get someone like William Barr, who is absolutely frightening. He doesn't know the first thing about rule of law.
Right.
Doesn't know the first thing. I could take a 12-year-old and they make a better attorney general than William Barr.
Absolutely.
It's disgusting. So I think with Trump, I think he's unable to understand what it would mean to, for example, have a Holocaust or have millions of people dying. where it was possible not to have them not die. That's not his framework. What he's interested in is what kind of good publicity can he get from that. So the basic humanity that the Republicans in Congress don't have the courage to say out loud. They don't have the courage. They should read Profiles in Courage by JFK, where people cross the aisles to do the right thing. They don't have the courage. He doesn't have the ability to rise above and to protect and to care. And that's just the kind of person we elected as president.
Right. It's frightening, and sadly, it seems to say a lot about our country. And I think that one of the best things that could happen to our country would be if all those folks in the flyover states from Nebraska to Kansas and so on would read your book, and they might learn a lot from it. I think people all over the country could learn a lot. And the book, by the way, is Rama Trauma Trump. And tell us where folks can get it and how much it costs. I think you mentioned it's not costly at all.
It's actually very, very expensive, Lew. It costs $0.
Gotcha.
I'm not saying that and then, later on you have to send me your firstborn. No, it's free. It's a free book. Go to www.ramatraumatrump.com, and there it is. Just download it. You could get the 5 meg version, it's a PDF, or the high resolution 40 or whatever 45 megabyte version. You could see a free YouTube video of the book, so you don't even have to read it. It's just, well, you just have to watch a video. So
good.
that's how you could get it. If you're desperate to get a hard copy.
Oh yeah, I can see. Oh, very colorful. Yeah. Why don't you open a page or two and give people an idea of what it looks like inside? Okay, I am president. All right. I am a very stable genius. I give myself an A+. I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters. Yes. Okay.
So this actually does cost a bit of money. You can order this from the website. This is print on demand, and but the digital version is free. And I hope that people in the flyover states, who as I say, I had such a powerful, beautiful, amazing experience when they hosted me on my bicycle trip. I hope they check it out. I hope people in California, New York, and Vermont, and DC, I hope people read it. I don't want any money from it. If there's any organizations that would like to use it for fundraising, let them keep the money. I do not want money from this project. I want to increase, very simply, the structure of rule of law. I'd like to help bolster the United States Constitution.
Hear, hear. Well, thank you very much. So we've been talking today with Mark Laxer, the author of Rama Trauma Trump, and hope to see many people reading it soon.
Well, the first time I saw darling Corey, she was standing by my bed. Oh, baby.